Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Connection Point Conversations. We missed last week, and I'm really happy to be back here today. Thomas will be joining us in a few minutes. He's just getting himself all set up and organized because he's actually moved back to his home in Hawaii. So there's a bit of a time difference. And it's very early for him. So it's really nice that he's still going to join us. So today we're following up actually on the last conversation we had, which was about the qualities that we all need to embrace and to have. Hello, welcome. The qualities that we all need to embrace and use as a skill and a tool in terms of being a really good communicator. It helps us be more authentic. It helps us be non-judgmental. All of the things that we talked about last time. So if you haven't seen that video, that's sort of number one. Today is the follow-up. What we're doing today is we're going to talk about a structure for how to have that conversation, what that looks like. Now, it is a structure, and of course, everybody has to put their own spin on it. But the basis of what's important about the structure means that you don't come across in any judgmental way. Nobody can argue with you when it's about your feelings and your values and what you need. So there's some really important elements to having a really effective conversation. Sorry, little things falling out. Connection with somebody else. Having a conversation in a specific way is really, really helpful for building relationships, building connection, how to manage conflict, how to get yourself out of the weeds, as it were. It's absolutely brilliant. So the way I started really studying a lot of all this was way back when I started counseling and coaching and all of that. I went to a weekend workshop with Dr. Marshall Rosenberg from Nonviolent Communication. Such an amazing man. It was one of the best weekends I've ever had. And so I sort of took a lot of all of his premises and I added a few of my own that I think are really important before even starting the conversation. Now, this strategy or structure, I'm going to call it, you can use it with positive stuff as well. It's not like it has to be with conflict. But the basis part of it is we're going to talk about it when you're dealing with difficult people, conflict, and how to do that. So as we're waiting for Thomas, I just wanted to share with you really why it was important to me. I think I said it in a lot of other, shared in a lot of our other videos, that it's taken me a lifetime to learn, how to get out of a really dysfunctional family background. And communication was huge, and I knew so early on when I was a little girl, looking at all these adults, that they weren't communicating well. They were not being authentic. They were not being honest in their inauthenticity. And of course, I recognize that my parents went through divorce and all of that. How our communication is probably the most important thing in terms of making ourselves happier, more fulfilled, and engaging in more meaningful relationships. So there's a scientific. Somebody had said, we did a scientific report on the importance of communication, and we always hear that, but nobody actually really tells you how to do it unless you're in business school or, they've got these ideas of how to do it. I'm not really sure. However, I think it's really important that we teach our children, that we learn how to communicate from this really heart-centered place. I think that it could really change the world. Hence, that's why I'm always saying, change the world one conversation at a time. This is very dear to my heart. So, as this became clear to me, how important this is, the study I found said that 85% of our levels of our levels of happiness and fulfillment and success, actually, success being whatever it is you define, whether it's professional success, personal success, that 85% of that can actually be determined and factored completely by your communication skills. So this is why it's so important to me, and I really love this topic. In fact, a lot of my website is all about that. There's loads of resources on there as well. And I've added some videos and quick tips and things like that. So going back to last week, what we discussed was, some really important things that we need to be good communicators. So I'll just run by those while we're waiting for Thomas to join us. So the first one is consciousness. And all of these 5 principles actually, there's lots more than that, but it's just a start. It all feeds into the skills that you need to be able to have this conversation. So have the effective conversations. So consciousness, well, that's just a woo-woo word for knowing yourself. Knowing yourself, being in touch with your intuition and your needs and your values and your principles, really understanding yourself at an intimate level. That's what I believe consciousness is. So there's that. And then there's compassion. Well, we can't have good conversations if we don't have any compassion for others. If we don't have empathy, it's not sympathy. Compassion's different. And we need to have compassion for ourselves in, where we fall down, where we have to pick ourselves up, where it's not always that easy to do it, or, we're all emotional beings. We let ourselves down by losing it or getting upset or anything like that. So we have to have a lot of compassion for others and ourselves. It's really an important part. And I love curiosity. I think if you listen to the video from last week, you'll see that curiosity is really important to me because it allows us to be the mind of a child. It allows us to be able to not know the other person, not to project on the other person. It allows us to be able to sort of not know. And not knowing is like such a freeing thing. So that when you do see somebody who's trying to express themselves, you can be curious and ask really good questions. Questions that are not judgmental. Don't use the word why. That are open-ended. So that you can really, really intimately know that person's experience, what they need. And of course, this is the process. You need to be curious for yourself as well. So curiosity is a really big one. And I really love the fact, it was a long talk, I think we talked about courage. How much courage it really takes. A huge amount of courage to be in relationship with other people, to be real, to be vulnerable. And of course we mentioned the great conversation with Brené Brown about vulnerability, that TED Talk that she did really explains it so brilliantly in terms of what it gives you to be able to live from a vulnerable place. And of course her books are all written about a lot of all that stuff, and she's got a lot of the same strategies and structures. She's actually put in the same way, just called them different things. So I was really happy to read some of her books about all of that as well, as following, you just keep learning as you go. So, and then of course there's commitment. There's nothing in this world that really can't happen without being committed, and how you behave and what you do on a daily basis really shows what you're committed to. And I think that that's pretty important, because if you're committed to conflict, it's going to show up. If you're committed to embracing new ways of doing things, to ways of being, then that'll show what you're committed to. So that was the last video. It's sort of like a precursor to talking about communication today. So I'm still waiting for Thomas. I really hope he comes soon. And it'll be hard for him to just kind of dive into the conversation. So I don't really want to talk about the topic today until he arrives. So I'm hoping he's going to be here soon. I just know that he has to go into a special room, and it wasn't available till a specific time. So he's probably just getting himself all set up. And we will welcome him when he arrives here. So I'm hoping that everybody is doing well. I kind of missed being on here for the last 2 weeks. If I miss a week, it's like for a reason, but usually it's like, I kind of miss seeing everybody. So I hope everybody's doing well. I'd love to know if you've got any questions, whether you're watching the video live or whether you're going to watch it later, which a lot of people have a tendency to do. Please, shoot us a message, one of the both of us, whatever you want, and ask us some specific questions if you need them, or share with us what it is that you're struggling with in terms of how you would like things to be different. I mean, relationships are really hard things, and especially in couples and families, we've got pressure and stresses and difficult things to go through. Learning how to communicate differently is absolutely essential. Most of my sons, they're all really I'm proud of all of them. They have all engaged in counseling, learning how to be more responsible for themselves. And that is probably, when I say consciousness, I think responsibility really comes into that in a really big way. And to me, it's a huge value that I have. We're going to talk a lot today about, needs and values. And I actually have a real need. Hello, Thomas. I can see you starting. I'm going to just let Thomas in. Here. And I think, so what I was saying was that being responsible. Hello, Thomas.
Aloha,
Welcome.
Mia. Thank you. It
Aloha.
is great to see you.
Well,
Aloha.
aloha, and it is like that here. It is so hot here. The last few days it's been 32 degrees.
Oh, that is so great to hear. Vancouver, British Columbia, Metro Vancouverites, warm weather. Yay.
I know. Well, I'm so glad that we've got back on track and you're here today.
Thank you.
I did not want to start the whole conversation about today's topics until you were here. So I'm glad you're here. And
Thank you.
I was just talking about, I talked about last week what we discussed, and then I was just sharing with everybody the importance of responsibility and how that kind of fits into communication. Responsibility is being responsible for yourself and not having to be responsible for somebody else. And that when I talk about needing someone to be responsible, I mean that they're not projecting, they're not making me responsible for their feelings. So I think that that's a really important part. Hi, Janet. It's nice to see you. It's really important that we learn this one aspect almost before we do anything else.
I would agree.
Yes. Would you agree?
Yes.
It's so important not to make somebody else responsible. And I know I did that when I was younger. I mean, I'm guilty of that because I didn't know better. But now that I know better, I really, really work at not making, well, you did this, so I felt this, and your fault. You need to change. Do it that way, But I didn't know what I didn't know when I was 20 years old. So anyway, I told them that you've moved back home to your second home. Your second home, and you were really such a good sport going along with my desire to talk about communication today. So say hello to everybody and let's, see how you're doing.
I will. A big greeting. Aloha here from Honolulu. It is tremendous to be back and connected with you. And in a way, a lovely reconnection with our other home in Vancouver. It has been quite a journey in setting up yet again another home here. And yet I talk about communication, right? Exquisite communication between my husband and I in creating this new home here. So it feels like a great segue for me with you to talk about communications as far as it being one of the primary ways that we actually land on what it is that we want in our lives. And responsibility, yes, me being 100% responsible. And Mia, when I was challenged to be responsible in my life, it was at a point in time where I had no idea. I was really flustered with the word responsibility in therapy. And I broke it down in its simplest form. Responsibility for me is how I respond to the circumstance that comes into my life, that I'm 100% responsible for that. But it's simple, and yet it's a way that reminds me that because it was so foreign, I wasn't taught responsibility in my life, I broke it down and thought, okay, so how am I going to respond to something that's come into my life? So I think we're in the exact right place to have a conversation about that today.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. And what I love is over the months that we've connected, that I experienced with you this incredible level of respectful communication, that we talk deeply about how we feel, what we need, what we don't need, and what's going on. And I have experienced you as such a perfect example of how to be an excellent communicator. So, and it's a gift to me, because I think there's so many people out there who don't know that how important it is to be responsible. It's a hard thing in counseling to A, accept yourself, and B, try to encourage and support others to learn that piece.
That's a really, really good point. And before I dive in a little bit further, Mia, the microphone is sitting on your shoulder.
Yeah,
And
and
of
is it
course,
scratching?
there we go. If you can hold it away,
Hang on, I'll just move it around.
okay.
I just didn't want it sitting in front of my face.
Oh, I understand. Boy, that's much clearer, and there's no rubbing on that gorgeous blouse of yours.
Oh, thank you. It's actually a dress. I put a dress on.
Oh,
Well,
good for
because
you.
it's a sunny day, and I don't usually do dresses. So here we go. I'm in a dress,
That is great.
and I love the color.
It is
um,
beautiful on you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome. You're
Okay,
welcome.
so yeah, so I hear what you're saying, and I think that when you express how invaluable it is in terms of your intimate relationships, I really want to second that. That for me, in my intimate relationships with family, with friends, I'm not in a relationship with a partner at the moment, but I just know that that's when the need to express yourself authentically, responsibly, clearly is so important. Like, it doesn't show up for me if I'm not in partnership, but as soon as I'm in partnership with somebody, that I'm going to be required to hold myself accountable for how I respond. Does that
Mhm.
does that make sense?
Oh, lovely. It is this great gift from a tough conversation,
Hmm.
from a tough bit of communication. One of the huge benefits is that you get what you want.
Yeah.
And you're heard and you're clear about because you're coming from I and you're not projecting. And
Hmm.
essentially you're saying to your partner, here's something that's really important to me. They get to
Hmm.
understand how does it you feel. You get to communicate how you feel. They get to be listening to. And then of course, then you give them an opportunity to respond to the request that you're making. It's a lovely gift. And oftentimes I sold myself short, not realizing that because I was so afraid of tough conversations, I didn't
Hmm.
realize the benefit to them was so exquisite.
Oh, I just love that. That's, of course, that's what I want is my goal to share with others is that if you work at it, if you if you do this piece differently rather than being constantly not able to communicate well, the benefits and the gifts are huge and exquisite. What a great word. I often say you can communicate and it'll be sort of iffy. But if you communicate effectively, magic happens.
It
And
does.
I just love that. It's such a good quote. Anyway, so how do you feel about diving into it?
I am I am here, and of course, for the folks listening, I'm 3 hours earlier than you,
I
so it's a
know.
little earlier start, which is completely fine because, of course, here the sun and our beautiful home faces. Well, we're on the other side. We get sunsets, not sunrises, but of course, the whisper of sunlight here in Hawaii is just amazing. So I'm a little ready to go.
You don't have your coffee with you?
And I didn't. And of course, the other part of the story is that I'm not yet set up on my home. Some of the things that we ordered are not delivered yet. So I'm in a beautiful, it's called the Club Room. And there's some beautiful art behind me, which I think is
I can see
representative,
that.
yeah, of the Hawaiian Islands. So I wasn't able, between my computer and a bunch of other things, I wasn't able to bring my cuppa.
Your cuppa.
My
Oh,
cuppa.
I
Thank
love
you for
that.
that.
That's
Thank
so,
you. So
you're welcome.
I'm tealess. I'm tealess. Although it is brewing upstairs for my husband, but no, I am tealess, and I make that sacrifice.
Well, oh, you're very kind. Well, if I could
Thank
give
you.
you a cup of my beautiful English tea, I would.
Oh, lovely.
There we go. All right. So I mentioned nonviolent communication to everybody. And I really just want to preface this yet again that when we teach a structure, it's the principles behind it that are important. Of course, you have to use your own words, but there's some really important elements to it. So what I really believe is something that is the first step is intention.
Yes.
And why I say I believe that to be the beginning is that I think it can do a huge amount of um, potential damage if you're not really clear yourself on what you hope to have happen from this conversation. And when I say that, it's because I ask myself regularly, if I talk about this, is my intention to create more connection or is my intention to create disconnection? And I have to really be clear and make sure that my hope and my desire of what it is I need to talk about is going to be is going to be clear, my heart is going to be open to create the connection that I'm desiring. I think you probably have some pretty profound things to say about intention, because I know last time we talked about it, you did.
Yes. Crystal clear.
Yeah.
With intention, crystal clear. And I would go so far as, Mia, because I've lived my life with intention for quite a period of time. My entire marriage to my husband has been intentionally based. I remove the word hope with intention. And it's not that I don't believe in hope, but hope oftentimes for me has me wanting to create a condition and not be a partner in creating that. So my intention is always crystal clear. I remove hope because with that clarity and crystal clear, and that's often when I coach folks and we're working with intention, some of the frustration that comes up for folks is landing on clarity, And it is such a powerful gift to us. So the state that you want to create, the outcome you want to create for yourself with intention has got to be crystal clear. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into the mechanics, but it's something that for the longest time was frustrating for me because I didn't live a life of clarity. I didn't realize what it was like to land on something that was so clear because, of course, when you're partnering with the giver of intention, and of course that's the universe and that's all it does, its interest is only in clarity. Only in clarity.
That's brilliant. I love that.
So it's in communication, but ultimately other things as well. And I'm sure we'll have another session on that. So for me, I would remove hoping that it would be clear. It would be intending that it would be crystal clear. Yeah, exactly. And then bringing voice to it. And then I actually go the next step. I write it down so that I can see the clarity for myself in terms of what it is that I want.
I was just going to say that.
Oh,
I was just going to say, I write it down as well. So I think it's really important to write it down because then you can see it. And then when you look at it, you can actually see where it needs a little tweaking, if it does, or where it needs more clarity. Now, of course, intention comes up when intention becomes clearer when you get to the third step. So we'll leave intention and move on to the next step. So for me, as I'm trying to describe the structure, this isn't always the path you have to follow. It could be simpler or more complex. But I think it's really important to acknowledge in a really short, clear way what happened, what has actually happened, without judgment of what's actually going on. So there's a difference, like let's just use slamming a door, for instance, because that was a big one when I was a child.
Okay.
Is you slam that door and somebody takes it personally, that they think it's somehow you've done it to them. Whereas the door slammed is completely different. So when you're describing something that's happened or something that's been said, it's really important that clarity has no judgment behind it. You're not blaming somebody, you're not criticizing them, because that's taking responsibility for yourself. Now, have you got something you'd like to add about that?
That's the big challenge. And of course, for me, prior to meeting that challenge, what I wasn't aware of was that I was coming from the place of being a victim. So everything happened to me and not for me. So when I began to describe in communication, whether it was a kind of a breath of a buggo or it was this active listening with my husband, I wouldn't take responsibility and make an I statement.
Yes.
And of course, what it began immediately was confrontation, because of course it would have him become defensive, or in other relationships where I wasn't really clear and I wasn't willing to take responsibility for the experience I had and communicate it from that vantage point. It created more confusion.
Absolutely. Oh, is that me or you? Oh, it was sounding.
No, that's me.
Okay. The lawnmower.
It is. It's the worker bees blowing leaves around here in Honolulu. They will be gone in a moment.
How fun is that? No worries. So the reason that, as Thomas suggested, is that it goes back to your intention to not have the other person feel criticized.
Correct.
Feel judged by how you're expressing what you need and want. And then again, it's taking responsibility for not projecting that. So I think this is a really important piece, and isn't always easy to do, as you've shared. It's a difficult one, but it's really important. It's probably one of the most important pieces, because the reason it's so important is that it then allows the other person to be able to really hear you. Otherwise, they go immediately into the reptilian brain of defensive-ness, feeling, scared, feeling judged, feeling whatever it is that they would then feel if our intention isn't to actually say that in without those particular negatives. So,
and an example, Mia, and perhaps this might be inclusive in another step. When I approach a circumstance and I'm clear about how it is that I'm feeling,
yeah,
I usually enter the conversation this way. When you made a comment that the color I chose for the desk wasn't correct, I felt a little bit of shame.
Well, that's the next step, isn't it?
Good. Okay, great. Thank
literally,
you.
He's already described the next step. So
okay, good.
That's why this step is just a short one,
okay.
Because then the next step moves into how you felt. Right? So that's the third step. And again, when you're really clear on how you felt, what you need or don't need, how your principles, like how something essentially important to you was compromised in that moment or over a long period of time that you haven't expressed. That's when you can express. No one can argue with your feelings. Your feelings are always right. They're correct. They're yours. And nobody says, well, you shouldn't feel like that, or you can't feel like that. When you're expressing it in a non-judgmental way, you're taking responsibility, and then you're saying, I feel sad. I feel hurt. I feel whatever it is that you feel, disrespected. I mean, that's still kind of up there with the angry word, but because usually underneath disrespected is again hurt, right? It's another layer. So it's really important to be really clear on what that feeling is, what it is that you need. So it would be great. I know you're going to come up with an example that's going to be better than mine because I don't really have an example, but learning what it is that you need out of that situation so that you don't feel hurt or sad or whatever it is that's going on for you, then it's really important to say what need was compromised there for you. Let's just say somebody had come across and they were yelling at you. Well, my need would be that my need would be not to be, yelled in such a conflictual way, or my need for not being criticized by that statement. It's still, you have to be very careful not to sound like you're judging what the other person has done. And I think that is a key piece. But also, we all have needs and principles that we live by. Human beings have needs. A lot of the time in relationship, it goes to if it's difficult for me, it goes to my need for safety. Well, that's one of the really most important needs as a human being. So human beings have like 9 essential ones, and then we have all our own personal ones. And of course, it's really important to look at those and figure it out and define what those are for you. And then of course we have principles. And principles are, wow, those are really important. I stand on justice and equality and all sorts of principles. So if any of those needs and values that we have, our values and our principles are compromised, then we need to share that with somebody else. And that's where we're coming from in terms of this one little piece. And it's the most important piece because you've defined the intention, you've explained what happened, and this is the piece that's about you. It's about your work. And when you know all this, it makes the intention easier. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does, me. And then back to the biggest struggle for me, and thankfully not today, although, I mean, there could be a moment where it could be, but the biggest struggle was being able to understand and identify what the feeling was for me.
Mm.
Because oftentimes I would use, as we've discussed in previous sessions, I would use the tip of the iceberg called anger. I would use anger as an expression to ensure that the person I was communicating with didn't really know how I was feeling.
Mm.
So it
The
was a way for me to,
more
well,
vulnerable feelings.
yeah, and not wanting to be vulnerable because I was taught, lots of things around feelings, but most importantly, right, as a little closeted gay boy who whose superpower was sensitivity, and I was taught not to feel, then I would begin to layer things over top so that somebody wouldn't get a sense of how it was I was feeling. So
Mm-hmm.
the importance of being able to take the time to really get a sense of how does it feeling, and like you had said before, giving yourself permission to have that feeling, and then being able to communicate that nobody had made you feel that way. That when you said to me that the color of the desk that I chose wasn't correct, I felt shame.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I've taken some time with that exchange. I've taken some time to sit and think, okay, so it kind of got me here in the chest. I could feel it, which for me physically is where shame lands.
Yeah,
I've
me too.
taken time to figure that out, and now I'm willing to have I'm willing to have clear communication about how it is that that comment landed for me, and I felt shame.
Exactly. And I think shame is actually probably one of the most vulnerable feelings that a
Oof.
lot of us feel. In fact,
Yes.
I didn't even know until a few months ago that my emotional response was actually shame. It's been absolutely illuminating to know that that was where I was coming from. I took a really skilled counseling session. It was brilliant. What I love what you said, and I really feel a synchronicity with your experience as a little boy was very much my experience for myself, which was that my superpower is sensitivity. And I think what happened is I built up, I think most people do this, you build up an armor.
Of
You
course.
build
Yeah,
up an armor.
Brene Brown calls
Yeah,
it armoring up, where
armoring
suddenly
up.
you're going to
Yeah,
get to the point where you're going to protect yourself. You're
yeah,
going to throw everything on top of that and not allow anybody to see how you're really feeling. So for
yeah.
me, it was really important that I didn't have people know that I was afraid.
I know. And so I said that to one of my sons the other day. I said, it really sounds like you're afraid. I'm not afraid. You know, these are boys we're talking about, and men. And I thought, but I can hear it and feel it and sense it, like that underneath that. So it takes sometimes quite a process, as
It
you
does.
suggesting, to really understand the authentic, real, heart-centered, vulnerable, core, raw place of what it is you're really feeling. And as you say, you know, I talked about hurt and sadness, but underneath that is generally something that reflects on us in terms of shame,
Yes.
because you chose the wrong color. Like, seriously. No. I
And
know. I
yet
can feel shame.
the comment was completely, I mean, completely
So
fine. And of course, it
innocent.
didn't come at me. It was, and of course, it just meant in that particular point. So I'm being triggered. I can
Yeah.
figure that out,
Yeah.
and ultimately, it's just knowing, okay, Thomas. And I do. I notice the first thing is I'm not breathing. I notice the second thing, the sensation. My body is amazing at being able to tell me what emotion has landed. And then my work is to acknowledge its presence. And
Mm-hmm.
I just stop the conversation really gently. And I oftentimes use this little hand motion, not pointed directly at my husband, but it's a little bit down, just saying, sweetie, I'm just going to stop for a second. I'm going
Let
to
me
give
breathe.
myself an opportunity to feel. I'm going to take a breath. And when I get a sense of what's going on for me, I'm going to sit in it for a little bit because I want to acknowledge that feeling because that's really what it wants me to do. I've
Oh, I
spent
love that.
decades not acknowledging a feeling. And then when I'm clear, I'm going to come back to you and then we'll continue the conversation. And he
Well, I
always
love it.
says, great, thank you.
I love that. And so what's really important about what Thomas has just said in terms of my experience and the ability to say, hello, Flora. It's nice to see you on here. My stepdaughter just joined.
Lovely.
Um, yeah, is the ability to say, wait a sec, I need to take a time out. I want to honor and be clear. Again, it's about your clarity on what this feeling is that's coming up for me. I am the one who's triggered. I need to figure this out and what I need from this. And I loved what you said. That's just so important. If everybody can be okay with their partners and say, and trust their partners, I'm going to just kind of, I'm going to breathe. Now, it takes everybody a different length of time. It might
It
take you
does.
five seconds, or it might take you 5 minutes, or it might take you 5 hours or 5 days. I mean, it's important to then be able to say, I need to process this. I love you, and I'm going to come back to this. But this is my stuff, and I need to sit with it and be okay with whatever it is that's going on. And there's a little, for me, I go to that, that's my little girl self in there that I need to look after. I need to love and support. And because then that creates a clarity for me about what it is that happened. It's not the other person's fault. It's my stuff. And then being able to share that, because we all have this going on. It's just that most people don't acknowledge it. So I loved that you brought that up like that. That was, and it's such an important part of the process. So thank you so much for saying that. And I hope you all understand that it is okay to take a time out, isn't it? To give yourself that gift.
It is. It's self-honoring. And because we're not taught that level of self-care for ourselves, and oftentimes, so, you know, I grew up with this kind of Irish-Scottish heritage, which was all about, let's just kind of plow through something. Let's not acknowledge how we're feeling. Let's just get to the end. Are we okay? And we're not okay. And it's like that Monty Python scene where, you know, somebody gets his arm cut off and said, "Oh, nothing. It's just a flesh wound." That's kind of what I grew up with.
I know.
Right? I witnessed my family, you know, kind of energetically bleeding, and nobody was willing to name the elephant in the room, and the little boy was really confused. But the teaching for me was, don't even think about sharing how you're feeling right now. Just survive. Just survive.
I know. I so get that. My heart just goes out to that little boy, because I really appreciate it when somebody can understand that part of my being able to communicate something that's so very vulnerable and intrinsic to who I am as a human being, that I'm taking responsibility for that. But to be able to share that and have that honored by myself and another is like such a huge gift. So this is again where intention comes in, and it sort of follows all the way through the whole conversation process, doesn't it?
Indeed. And always the intention for me is to be clear about how I'm feeling, and then be able to share that feeling with whomever it is that I'm communicating to. That's always really important to me. And then from there, and Mia and I learned, and I know we talked about this some time ago in just a conversation, not about this topic, but I lead with, when you told me that the color of the desk that I chose was not correct, I felt some shame. And I'm wondering if we can have a conversation about that, because I made up a story that you didn't love me because I chose the wrong color of the desk.
I know, and that's just so brilliant. Oh my God, Thomas, you're so on track today, because that's exactly what it is. So there's that piece, and I think Brené Brown talks about that, is, and I was in a conversation with another colleague in the United States, and she said, well, it's such a good question. What do you think that means about you? You know, like, what's the story you're telling yourself that, what, I don't love you because that happened, or, you know, because she's a counselor as well. So, and then I went, oh yeah, it always goes back to what is the story I told myself about what that meant. And I encounter that the same as everybody does a lot. And the more I'm aware of it, the easier it gets to be alive and to communicate and chat about all that stuff. When I think, oh, I'm telling up, you know, my son's really upset with me, but it doesn't really have anything to do with me. It doesn't mean he doesn't love me. It just means he's upset with me, and it's his process, and it's not personal. It goes back to the Toltec teachings, doesn't it? Don't take anything personally.
Don't
make up a story about what it means.
And to be able to acknowledge that I was making up a story is also a beautiful way, because then comes an opportunity where I get to be quiet and I get to listen to the response. And oftentimes, first of all, the story 99.9% of the time in my life, the story is not true. So my husband will reflect back to me, Thomas, thank you for telling me how you feel. And I simply want you to know that it had nothing to do with me not loving you. I understand that you might have felt that way. You made up the story. Thank you for telling me that. But then he gets to be able to say to me, we had a conversation about the 3 different desks options. I was sure I chose the chestnut brown, and you brought home the natural. So I was just concerned that, and of course it's funny, communication about, I'm just concerned that we just didn't connect from a communication perspective. So suddenly the little boy in me now feels safe. He feels heard, right? My husband loves me. I'm in a good place, and we can work through this, because ultimately in an exchange of communication, if I'm the one listening, or in this case, my husband listening, he will say to me, or I will say to him, and this is gold in Mia, he will simply say to me, how can I best support you?
Absolutely. That's when you have a partner that's able to do that and be with you in all of that and have the same skills. That's such a brilliant question. Now, not everybody's able to do that. In fact, a lot of people
Correct.
don't know that. And that's why the next part, the fifth part, is kind of important. There's a piece in here when you're talking about, like what you've just said, going a little bit further and saying how that compromised what you needed.
Yes.
And you've just described that. Exactly. So that's an important piece. It takes a little bit of skill to be able to do that because you have to know yourself intimately to be able to then say that to somebody else. But isn't it brilliant that your husband can then say, I can see that we have maybe a disconnect on that conversation that we had. How can I best support you?
Yes.
Including himself in that. He's part of the, you're including each other. It's a synergistic, collaborative relationship is how I see it. I mean, I think it's great.
I came into the conversation, my intention was to get crystal clear. What color does my husband want?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What color does my husband want? And through all of that exchange, the most important thing for me in the world is to know what it is that he wants. And can I do everything I possibly can to honor that? And at the same time, it's been okay that I felt some shame. It's been okay that I made up a story. But now we've settled it all down. And ultimately, what we get to create for ourselves is let's take the desk back that we got. It wasn't the natural one, and it's okay. We get to get the chestnut colored one. We bring it in, and all is good. And of course, when all is good, it means that, and I usually end with, or my husband will say to me, are you complete? Is there anything else? Is there anything else you need to add to the conversation, right? And the language that people can use is what is best for them. But ultimately, it means that you can bring closure to that circumstance, that little bit of upset, and ultimately know you've landed on something that works for the two of you, and now you're crystal clear.
Well, that's a collaborative process.
That's a collaborative process.
If you're in a relationship with somebody who you haven't experienced being able to do that yet, and I say yet because it's a learning process, then what's really important is making a request or asking the person for what you need in that moment, whatever that is. In terms of a desk, maybe you could ask for better communication and conversation about making a choice. Or
it's a great point. And what we did, Mia, in the midst of obviously lots of moving pieces here, right, in Honolulu.
Right. Yes.
We came back to my husband is really brilliant at creating. So as a profession, he's a project manager, and he's really brilliant at making lists. And that's not something that really works for me, although I do it, but I probably do it more energetically. So in the end, we landed on, and I said to him, you have this really powerful skill. I'm wondering if we can create kind of a shared list that I can go somewhere to realize what it is that we're working on. So I called on a strength that he has to actually bolster, not a weakness in me, but something that I don't have as big a value for. So we collaborated in creating kind of a third tool that we could use and both be able to go to see, it was the chestnut color. And of course, we both kind of giggle and thought to ourselves, is it really that important that we do that? And I say to him, but the sheer fact that I had experienced shame for myself in something that we thought wasn't such a big deal, why don't we go ahead and do that and create a tool for ourselves that might help relieve some bumps down the road with the other 37 things that we actually bring into this new home here in Honolulu.
Right. Oh, that's brilliant. And that is part of the creative collaborative process of being in a relationship with somebody else, is then finding what it is that's going to work for both of you so that you have clarity, you have understanding, you know what each of you wants, and you're not blind with it all. I mean, I remember so many times over the years there being a total miscommunication about what each of us wanted or was different or wasn't communicated. And then I just know it can create a huge amounts of conflict for people. And I love what you did. You sort of came up with a strategy that works for the two of you in terms of lists. And as you say, and that's actually kind of, if you think about it, part of Imago, which is the premise that we get into relationship with people, we fall in love with them because it's the amoeba. Well, actually, it's the amoeba effect, which is that we're all a little bit misshapen, and then we find somebody else that matches our misshapenness. But really, what that is that they have skills that we don't have, and we admire that. And yes. so when I describe relationship, it's like, to be healthy, you have complementary skill sets, but we must be really careful in that space to not learn the skills we need to be whole ourselves because we're letting somebody else do it. I know that's a bit of a weird concept, but that's the amoeba effect, is that we actually start to both need to be more whole rather than merging with somebody because we have deficits that each of us is fulfilling.
True. That would be the extreme of that, I think, and correct me if I'm not in the right area, but enmeshment, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Good. And for me, the example is this. What exists in these spaces between my fingers and my thumb, my life, is a desire to have somebody fill them in a way that obviously is fine with me. And I remember prior to coming out, so this is pre-1988, particularly relationships where I was pretending to be straight, I always found it difficult that my connection to a woman on a number of different levels wasn't complete. So it was kind of this, it just wouldn't fit. And then when I finally found the courage, right, to come out to my world, and when I eventually fell in love with a beautiful man, suddenly this happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was this matching of the values. It was matching of my heart, most clearly. But ultimately, in my relationship with my husband, in relationship with some amazing friends in my life, and there's just a few of them, I eventually look for how can somebody complement and fit into these spaces, because ultimately, I don't know how to fill these, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to fill these. And for me, in my experience of working with you on these calls, there's some beautiful ways that you do this, and then suddenly I feel more whole than I felt before in relation to a topic that we're speaking about. This is what I'm looking for, but I had to realize that I was worthy of being able to find that skill set or that complement that could come into my life and help me feel more whole.
I love that. Thank you. That explains it really, really well.
Well, and it usually landed on a feeling state for me, because I had this feeling there wasn't a fit for me, and of course there wasn't, right? I was gay and I was trying to do a straight thing. Of course it didn't fit, but until I got in touch with how I was feeling, I couldn't come up with an analogy for myself. And I remember doing this with my therapist, and he said at that particular time, Thomas, what would you need to fit into the spaces? And ultimately I said—
Such a good question.
Yeah, it was a great question. And of course, I was being the good client, right? Like I had to get it right. And I just said, well, you other persons. And he said, well, actually, take a breath. Is that really true? Is it really other people that you need? And of course, what I eventually landed on was recognizing in other people values, morals, ethics, all those things that were really important for me, inviting them in. And then ultimately, I mean, I've tried on a lot of this and some of it fit, but ultimately, for those most near and dear to me, it's fit like this. So this notion of creating a really great way of communicating with somebody else, for me, it's also looking for the misfit, if you will, in the desk. And then suddenly with my husband realizing, oh, because he brings chestnut to me, and suddenly this wholeness I'm feeling again, the story's gone, the shame is gone, and I'm back to this beautiful space of feeling complete with him, where it's like, oh, we get to giggle about that little bit of a hiccup, but I'm back here.
Exactly. And that's what everybody wants to achieve, is then that safety and security and the togetherness, which is important. And I think that a lot of us all over the world, we get into relationships and we bring a lot of our dysfunction, codependency, and all of that. And that's like a whole other topic when it comes to defining our separateness within our togetherness. Does that make any sense?
Yes, I love that, because first and foremost, we're not separate. Although my ego thinks I am, and the stories I make up has me separate from, hang on a second, I was clear it was natural, you were clear it was chestnut, you don't love me, I mean, here we go, right?
Yeah.
Separate.
Yeah, I know. And that's where a lot of stuff can come from, is that feeling of separateness. And that's a whole nother big topic in terms of disconnection. And
Yes.
I love the work of Gabor Mate, because he says that all uncomfortableness, all discomfort, all pain comes from being disconnected. And whether it's you're not connected to spirit, heart, to mind, whatever it is that your disconnect is, that's what causes the pain. And when we're imagining that we're separate and have a disconnect to the people that love us, that we're in relationship with, we're kind of doing that to ourselves. We're kind of making ourselves feel separate or isolated.
And would the emotion, Mia, be fear?
Well, I know for me it's fear.
Yeah, I think generally it is fear, particularly in a relationship. For me, the fear was, oh, my husband doesn't love me. I think of it now, and
that's a terrifying thought.
It is, and with this beautiful empathy and self-compassion to that little boy in me who wasn't feeling like I was protecting him. You go and judge and think, well, yeah, what a silly story. But ultimately, it was that silly story that got me to the point where I could say to him, here's simply what it is that I thought. I know that it's not true. I know now. But we either come from fear or we come from love.
You can't have both at the same time. And that's a really important thing, because I think a lot of the time when you do come from a difficult childhood, you don't trust others. You don't trust the adults. You don't trust. And so as we grow up, that's been my biggest challenge, is I say to myself, okay, wait a minute. Where am I not trusting? Am I not trusting myself? Am I not trusting the other person to love me and be with me and all of that? So I think it really does come down to an awful lot of that part of really learning trust for yourself.
True. And I really like that you alluded, the first thing that came up for you was this notion of, am I not trusting myself?
Yeah, I always ask myself that. You know what?
It's great, because all of the mistrust that's existed for me has come from this place of, first of all, I had no idea how to trust me. So it meant that I had no idea how to trust anybody else. So as I began this journey of wanting to do that, the first was, whoa, let's look at how it is that you're not trusting you. That would be my foundation.
Yeah. Well, I came out of my last marriage. It's taken me probably 10 years to learn how to really trust myself. I really, really did not trust myself at all. And that goes into a whole nother topic, of course, in terms of different personality types. However, I thought I thought I couldn't trust myself. And so learning how to do that has been so much better. Like, I'm really looking forward to meeting somebody one day where I can really practice this, these new skills of trust. I think it's really important, but it is a hard thing to learn how to do. And we also don't identify it. We go, oh, I'm feeling this and I'm feeling that. But then asking yourself, okay, where am I not trusting in this moment?
True.
Whether you're not trusting in the universe, the process, yourself, the other person. There's different things you don't trust. I wouldn't trust my cooking, for instance. But, there's different levels of trust I'm talking about here. I do trust myself to make a nice cup of tea. No.
And as I struggled with trust, and I remember landing on this, and it seems simplistic, but quite wise in this notion of it. And I think as I struggled, my therapist said to me, what's most difficult in not trusting? And I said to him, not trusting. So not trusting is really difficult when I'm not trusting. When I just begin to lean into and maybe dip my big toe into this pool of self-trust, it then starts to become a little easier. And then I'll dip all 5 toes and eventually put in a foot. Then eventually, and I did it really gradually, and good for me for doing that, but I realized, wow, so now what's most difficult for me when I'm not trusting is being able to recognize, oh, isn't that interesting, dear Thomas? You're not trusting right now.
I know.
Well, you're not trusting God, you're not trusting the universe, you're not trusting the people around you, but ultimately the foundation is where can I find out, am I not trusting myself?
Absolutely. And I think I think that being sensitive and intuition and trusting your intuition and what you essentially know, the truth is quite simple down there. I always love to say that. However, we just mix it all up and stir the pot and put other things in there. And it's like, whoa, the truth is really simple. And it really does come a lot of the time where I'm not trusting. And I'm like you, everybody, you got to learn to listen to your body. Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate somebody saying thank you to us.
That is my dear friend Alexandra. Alexandra's in
Hello.
Naramata. And I mean, speaking of gift of taking this ability to translate good communication, from my intimate relationship with my husband, and this is a woman that's been in my life for 25 years who's helped me learn, who would be the first to say that she's also learned from me. But it's one of those gifts that the two of us have, and probably the biggest share we have with each other from time to time when we're struggling is this notion of, how can I support you? And boy, when I hear those words from Alexander, when I hear them from other people, I'm suddenly able to, it's a gift of breath, right? When Alexander says to me, how can I support you? I notice before that comment comes in, and she's not responsible for my not breathing, but I realize I've made a choice not to breathe. And it's a gift from her for me to be able to remember, breathe, because of course it's from that inspirante, that inspiration, that in-breath that I'm willing to now take, that I can begin to source how it is that I'm feeling. So to have it in friendships is divine. And of course it's taken, obviously a quarter of a century to develop that, but it is extraordinary. It really is extraordinary. So,
well, it's being able to receive that.
It is. Actually, thank you. That's actually really great. I'm worthy enough to receive that.
You're worthy
from
enough to
Alexandra.
receive. Exactly.
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
think that's it sounds like it's sort of a minutia piece, but it's a pretty important piece. And I think that being able to say to somebody, how can I support you? You say that to me all the time. I actually still feel that I'm not sure I trust that yet about our friendship, which is really an interesting thing.
But so great for me to hear that, and thank you for being so brave to tell me that.
I know that was a hard thing to say.
And it's okay. It's completely okay.
And it's my stuff. It has nothing to do with you. So this is where we all need to really take responsibility. It's such a big part. Now I'm really conscious that we've only got 3 minutes left, and I just want to wrap everything up and hope that this conversation about good communication is really going to start the process for you, for everybody who's listening now or later. And I love sharing with you, Thomas, because there's just so much synergy between, learning together and supporting each other. And so I thank you so much for always asking me that question. It's lovely.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Really appreciate that. And so I really hope that if anybody out there really is confused or struggling with anything that we've said, please contact either one of us. We're happy to chat with you about it. Message on Instagram, or, we always put on, our emails and contact numbers. So if anybody wants to really dive a little bit deeper in how to build better relationships through communication and authenticity and knowing yourself, Brené Brown's written some great books on all that kind of stuff. But I think that where Thomas and I come from is that we're here to support you through that process. And sometimes it really helps to have somebody walking that process with you through that part of the journey.
Oh, so true. Whether it's a counselor therapist in your specialty, or there's a coach accountability in my specialty, remembering that only when we realize that only when you realize that you're responsible for those emotions that you have, for how it is that you respond to them, how you react to them, will you be able to come to the table with somebody with this mutual eye to understanding that you need to find a resolution that works for both of you. And being able to bring that to the table is such a powerful statement of self-worth.
It really is. And what a brilliant way to end today. We've got to say goodbye. We're going to run out of time. We don't want to lose the video. So we'll post it if you want to watch it again. And we love you all and happy to be back. And aloha.
Aloha.
Okay. Bye.